Nadia had not slept in 31 hours. That was the first thing she would think about later, when people asked her how it happened. Not the storm, not the power failure, not the unfamiliar lodge with its unmarked doors and identical hallways that smelled of pine and old stone. She would think about the 31 hours, and about how a body pushed past a certain point stops caring about anything except a flat surface and silence. She had taken the last supply cart from the healer's post at the eastern ridge, bumping along a road that was more mud than path, with 3 broken ribs and a splint across her left side, and a bag of dried herbs on her lap that was worth more than everything she owned. The ribs were her own. She had slipped carrying a patient 2 nights ago, landed badly on the edge of a treatment table, and then kept working because there was no one to replace her, and she was the kind of person who kept working. That was also a thing she would think about later. The Royal Pack Lodge was enormous by any standard. 4 floors of dark timber and gray stone, built into the side of a mountain like it had grown there. She had been told to report to the healer's wing on the 2nd floor, collect her assignment papers and find a bunk in the apprentice quarters. Simple enough. She had the paper map they had given her at the gate, but the paper map had not accounted for the power going out at 11 at night, or for the fact that the wing markers on the wall were small bronze plaques that needed light to read. She found a staircase. She went up. She opened a door that she was almost certain was the right one. The room was dark. The room was warm. The room had a bed in it, large and solid and smelling of something clean. Cedar, she thought, or maybe it was the wool blankets, thick and dark, heaped up in the center of it like a small mountain. Nadia put down her bag. She sat on the edge of the bed just to rest for a moment. That was the last thought she had. She woke to light, not the soft gray light of dawn that she was used to in the ridge post, but a hard, direct lamplight that came from somewhere above her and landed right on her face like an accusation. "Get up." The voice was not loud. That was the strange thing. It was not shouting, and it was not threatening, and it did not rise at the end the way voices do when someone is asking a question. It was 2 flat words, spoken at a volume only slightly above normal, and yet every part of Nadia's body responded, as though she had been grabbed by the collar. She sat up too fast. The broken ribs spoke immediately, a sharp pain that made her breath catch. She pressed a hand to her side without thinking and then looked up and found the source of the voice. He was standing a few feet from the bed, tall, genuinely tall, not the exaggerated tall of someone in boots and posture, but the kind of tall that was just a fact about a person. Dark hair, still damp from something, or maybe from rain. A long gray coat with the collar turned up and mud dried on the lower half of it. He looked like he had come a very long way and was very tired and was deciding, with great patience, not to show either of those things. His eyes were light, almost silver in the lamplight, and they were fixed on her with the specific, measuring quality of someone who has already formed an opinion and is now collecting evidence to support it. Nadia did not know who he was. This would matter later. At the moment she only knew that she was in the wrong room, and he was in it with her, and she was still holding her ribs. "I am so sorry," she said. "I came in last night during the power failure. I thought this was the healer's wing. I have an assignment. I am an apprentice. I was told to report to the 2nd floor. I had a map, but I could not read the plaques in the dark." She was talking too much. She knew she was talking too much. She stopped. He had not moved. He was looking at her the way people look at a problem they are calculating the cost of solving. "You slept in this room," he said. "I did not intend to. I sat down to rest and I fell asleep. The door was unlocked. I genuinely believed I was in the right corridor. This room is locked." Nadia looked at the door. Then she looked back at him. "It was not locked when I tried it." Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A slight tightening at the corners of his mouth. He turned his head and looked at the door himself, as though it had done something to disappoint him, and then looked back at her. "Your name," he said. "Nadia Holt." He repeated it once, very quietly, as though filing it somewhere. Then he stepped back and said, "Stay in this room. Do not touch anything. Do not leave." He walked out. The door did not close all the way behind him. Nadia sat on the edge of the enormous bed with her hand still pressed to her ribs, and watched the thin line of light in the gap, and thought about how this was already the worst start she had ever made anywhere, and she had made some genuinely terrible starts. She found out who he was 40 minutes later. A woman came first, older, wearing the gray uniform of lodge staff, with the kind of face that had learned long ago not to show what it was thinking. She brought a lantern and a chair, and set the chair beside the door and sat in it without speaking. Then 2 men came, both in border guard uniforms. They stood on either side of the doorway. Then a 3rd man came, older, with the silver rank markings of a senior council member. and he looked at Nadia with an expression that was not unkind, exactly, but was deeply uncomfortable, which told her something. "Miss Holt," he said, "do you know where you are?" "In the wrong room," she said. "I have explained this. This is the private chambers of Alpha King Calum Arden," he said, "the ruling head of the Northern Pack territories." The silence after that had a texture. Nadia had a habit, developed over years of working in situations that required clear thinking, of identifying the most important fact in a room and focusing on it before anything else. The most important fact right now was that she had not trespassed with any intent. The second most important fact was that intent, in cases like this, was famously difficult to prove. She said, "I understand. I would like to explain what happened." "You will have the opportunity to explain," the council member said, "in the morning, before the full council." "The full council," Nadia repeated. "Alpha King Calum will be presenting the situation for review. You will be asked to give your account." He paused. "I would suggest you sleep, if you can." He said it as though it were a kindness. Maybe it was. The woman in the chair stayed. The door stayed slightly open. Nadia lay back on the enormous bed, because there was nowhere else to lie, and stared at the ceiling, and thought about how she had come all this way, had worked 31 hours straight, and cracked her own ribs lifting a man twice her size, and traveled 6 hours on a mud road to end up here. She thought about what here meant. She was an apprentice healer from a small post on the Eastern Ridge, the daughter of a father who had died when she was 9, and a stepmother who had made the years afterward into a long, grinding lesson about what it meant to not belong somewhere. She had nothing. She had her training and her certification, and the bag of herbs beside the door. She was about to stand before a king and explain herself. She did sleep, eventually, not because she felt safe, because the body, past a certain point, makes its own decisions. The council chamber was on the 3rd floor, and it was every bit as serious as she had expected. 30 wolves, that was how many sat in the tiered rows of dark wood seats that curved around the central floor like a crescent moon. 30 wolves in various levels of formal dress, from full council robes to border guard uniform, all looking down at the circle of open floor where Nadia stood. She had been given time to change. She was still in her apprentice gray, which was clean but worn, and someone had brought her tea, which she had not touched because her hands were not entirely steady, and she did not want anyone to see that. Calum sat at the center of the upper tier. She could see him properly now, in daylight. He was younger than she had thought in the dark, late 20s, possibly 30. With the particular stillness of someone who had learned very early that stillness read as authority. He had changed out of the muddy coat. He wore something dark and simple, and he sat very straight, and he was looking at her with the same light, measuring eyes as the night before. He spoke first. "Nadia Holt," he said, "apprentice healer, certified through the Eastern Ridge Post, arrived at this lodge last night on assignment transfer. She was found this morning in my private chambers, asleep in my bed." The room held very still. She claims the entry was accidental. She claims she could not see the corridor plaques in the dark due to the power failure. She claims the door was unlocked. He paused. "I am presenting this to the council because the security of this lodge, and specifically of the ruling chamber, is a matter of pack law, not personal discretion." The council member who had spoken to her last night raised his hand. "The door," he said. "Was it locked?" "The locking mechanism failed during the power failure," another voice said from somewhere to Nadia's left. She thought it was a maintenance officer. "We found 2 other doors on that corridor with the same fault. The power surge reset the electronic locks." Silence. Nadia said, "May I speak?" Calum looked at her. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He waited. She said her name again. Just her name, first and last, clearly and at a normal volume. And then she stopped. She had practiced a longer speech. She had practiced explaining, step by step, everything that had happened. But standing on the open floor with 30 pairs of eyes on her, she understood that the speech was not going to help her. Speeches could be picked apart. Facts got complicated. Her name was simply a fact. It was the smallest possible unit of herself, offered without apology. The room was very quiet. Calum was looking at her with an expression she could not read, not the cold calculation of the night before. Something else, something that had no immediate name. Then he spoke. 6 weeks, he said. Service in the Royal Infirmary, under direct supervision. As a condition of pack law, the accused bears the obligation of demonstrated good standing before the claim of accidental trespass can be formally accepted. It was not exile. It was not a cell. It was 6 weeks in the same building as the king who had just accused her in front of 30 people. Nadia said, I accept. She said it the way she had said her name, plain, clear, and final. She would learn, much later, that Calum had already decided the door failure was real before he ever walked into that council chamber, that the 6 weeks was not a punishment he had to give, that he had given it anyway. She would spend a long time thinking about why. The infirmary was in the east wing of the lodge, 2 floors down from the council chamber and a world away from it in every other sense. It smelled of clean bandages and dried lavender, and the particular sharp herbal scent of wound salve, familiar enough that Nadia's shoulders came down by about 2 inches the moment she stepped through the door. The head physician was a short, brisk woman named Clara Marsh, who had the haircut of someone with no patience for anything that took longer than it needed to, and who looked Nadia up and down exactly once, decided something, and handed her an apron. "We are short-staffed," Clara said. "I do not care why you are here. I care what you can do. Can you set a splint?" "Yes," Nadia said. "Suture?" "Yes." "Identify a fever by touch versus instrument." "By touch. Instrument gives you the number. Touch gives you the pattern." Clara looked at her for a half-second longer. "Correct," she said, and walked away. This was, in Nadia's experience, the highest form of approval available from a physician. She was shown to a small room at the end of the infirmary hall. A cot, a window, a small shelf for her things. She had been in worse. She had been in much worse. She hung her bag on the hook beside the door, lined up her herbs on the shelf in the order she always kept them, because order was the kind of thing that cost nothing and paid for itself, and went back to work. She did not see Calum for 3 days. She knew he was in the lodge. She could feel it, the way you can feel a change in the pressure of the air before a storm, which was not a thing she had a rational explanation for, and chose not to examine too closely. She saw his guards. She saw staff members move with slightly more urgency when a certain set of doors was in use. She heard his name in conversations that stopped when she walked by, but she did not see him. On the 4th day, he came to the infirmary. He did not announce himself. He simply appeared in the doorway of the main treatment room, wearing the same dark, simple clothes as before, and stood there until Clara Marsh looked up from her writing. "Your shoulder," Clara said, which was apparently the entire conversation they needed. "The shoulder can wait," he said. "The shoulder has been waiting for 11 days, Clara said, in a tone that managed to be both perfectly respectful and completely inflexible. "It will not improve with further waiting. It will do the opposite of improve." She looked at Nadia without breaking her own argument. "Holt. Treatment room 3. Nadia set down what she was doing and went. She was in treatment room 3, laying out the things she would need, when she heard his footsteps in the hallway. She had already worked out, in the 3 seconds she had to think, that this was going to be one of 2 things. Either he was the kind of person who made his feelings about a situation clear immediately, in which case the next few minutes would be direct but simple, or he was the kind of person who kept everything behind his eyes and showed you nothing, in which case the next few minutes would be direct but not simple. He sat on the treatment table. He did not make a production of it. She said, "Which shoulder?" "Left," he said. She came around to his left side. The injury was visible before she even touched it. The slight drop in the shoulder line, the way he was holding that arm slightly away from his body, without quite realizing he was doing it. An old protective habit. She had seen it before in patients who had been managing pain for so long they had stopped noticing the accommodations they were making. "How long has it been like this?" she asked. 11 days, he said. "Clara's number." She pressed 2 fingers along the top of the joint. He did not make a sound, but she felt the slight change in his breathing, the contained, disciplined intake that meant the pressure hurt. "It is not dislocated," she said. "The muscles around the joint are inflamed. You have been using it wrong, compensating with your neck and right side. That is why your neck hurts too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I did not say my neck hurts." "You do not have to," she said. She worked in silence after that. Careful, methodical work, the kind she had learned to do with cold hands at 3 a.m., when the post was short-staffed and the patients could not afford anything but her best. When she was done, she stepped back and washed her hands and dried them. "You will need to come back in 3 days," she said. "And you cannot keep using it the way you have been." He was looking at her again. That same look, the one she had no name for. "You are not afraid of me," he said. It was not a question. Nadia considered this. "I have been afraid of many things," she said. "Being afraid does not stop the work." She picked up the used cloths and turned away to dispose of them. Behind her, she heard him get off the table. She heard him walk to the door. She heard him pause. He did not say anything else. He left. She stood at the basin for a moment after the sound of his steps faded down the hall and thought about what it meant that she had been almost certain, for about 1 second, that he was going to say something. She folded the thought away and went back to work. That evening, Clara Marsh found her at the end of the hall and handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a brief, formal note on council paper, the kind of paper that had a faint embossed seal at the top and was used when someone wanted to communicate that what they were writing was official. It said that following the council's review of the incident of the 17th, and in light of the confirmed equipment failure, her status had been upgraded from conditional placement to standard assignment. The 6 weeks remained, but without the formal charge attached to them. It was not an apology. Nadia read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the inner pocket of her bag, where she kept things she intended to think about later. She had a whole collection in there, folded up thoughts that she carried with her the way other people carried photographs. She went back to her cot. She lay down. She pressed her hand against the broken ribs that were slowly, dutifully healing, and looked at the ceiling, which was the same dark timber as everything else in this lodge. Everything solid, and old, and built to last. She thought about a king who had stood in a treatment room and let her press her fingers into his damaged shoulder without pulling rank or making it strange, who had looked at her with light silver eyes and asked her, in a voice that was genuinely curious, whether she was afraid of him. She thought about what he had looked like when she said what she said. Then she stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it was not going to help anything, and she was already too tired to be anything but honest with herself, which meant she needed to stop before the honesty got out of hand. She was still new here. She still did not belong. She would do the work. She would serve the 6 weeks. She would be careful and competent and invisible, which was the state she had been living in for years, and which, whatever its disadvantages, had the distinct advantage of keeping her safe. She closed her eyes. Outside, somewhere in the upper levels of the lodge, a door opened and closed. She did not think about who it was. She thought about it anyway. On the morning of the 8th day, Calum came back. He came alone this time, which was unusual. She had noticed, in the days since the treatment room, that he almost always moved with at least one guard at a specific and unobtrusive distance, close enough to be useful, far enough not to crowd him. The way the guards moved told you something about the person at the center. His guards were relaxed and precise. That combination was harder to achieve than most people knew. He came alone, and he came at the start of her shift, before Clara arrived, when the infirmary was quiet, and Nadia was doing the morning check of the supply cabinets and making a list of what needed to be ordered. She heard the door and turned, and he was standing in the entrance of the main room, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "Your shoulder," she said. "It is better," he said. "Then you do not need to be here," she said, which was not unfriendly, but was honest, and she watched him register it. He came in anyway. He sat on the bench along the wall, not the treatment table, the bench, which was where patients sat when they were waiting and which was not where a king would typically sit. He sat there and looked at the window across the room, which showed a gray sky and the top of a pine tree, and said nothing. Nadia went back to her supply count. They were quiet together for a while. It was the particular quiet of two people who are both aware they are being quiet, which is different from actually being quiet. She counted bandage rolls. She wrote down the number. She moved to the next cabinet. "You came from the Eastern Ridge," he said. "Yes." "How long were you there?" 3 years. "That post is understaffed and undersupplied," he said. "It has been for 2 years. I am aware of the problem." Nadia stopped counting. She turned to look at him. He was still looking at the window. "Why have you not fixed it?" she asked. He looked at her then, not offended, almost curious, as though the directness surprised him in a way he was taking a moment to assess. "Supply chain through the Eastern Ridge was disrupted by the border conflict," he said. "The materials are there. The road contract is in dispute. It takes longer than it should." "There were 3 men last winter," she said, "who did not have adequate wound covering after a hunting accident. I used my own clothing. I am telling you this not for sympathy but because you said you are aware of the problem. I want you to know what aware actually means in practice." He was quiet. "I have logged the supply gap in 6 separate reports," she said. "All 6 went to the district administrator. None of them reached anyone who could act on them." "They will reach me now," he said. She looked at him. He was still very still, very straight, but something in the quality of it was different from the council chamber. Less performance, more just the way he actually was. "All right," she said, and went back to counting. He stayed another 20 minutes. He did not explain why. She did not ask. When Clara arrived, she greeted him with the brisk, non-ceremonial nod she seemed to give everyone, and he nodded back and left. Clara poured herself tea. She looked at Nadia. She did not say anything. He said the supply gap will be addressed, Nadia told her. Clara took a sip of her tea. Good, she said, as though kings came to sort out supply problems in her infirmary every morning, which in fairness, they apparently now did. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Not always for long. Sometimes just for the shoulder check, which genuinely was improving. She could see the muscle memory returning, the shoulder line evening out. Sometimes he came and sat on the bench and read whatever he was working through. There was usually a leather folder. And she worked and he worked, and they occupied the same room the way two people can when they have decided, without discussing it, that they are comfortable doing so. She learned things about him the way you learn things about patients, not from what they say but from what they do. He read everything, not skimming, actually reading. The kind where you go back and reread a sentence you already passed. He had a habit of pressing his thumb to his lower lip when he was thinking, which she was fairly certain he did not know he did. He drank the infirmary tea, which was functional rather than good, without complaining. He asked about the patients, not by name at first, just by type. The border guard with the leg wound, the kitchen worker who had come in with the burn on her arm. He asked what they needed and whether they were getting it. Nadia answered plainly. He listened the same way. She was careful. She was always careful. But careful and closed off were different things, and she was realizing, slowly and with a kind of reluctant honesty, that he was making it difficult to be the second thing without meaning to. On the 11th day, a runner came for him, young, out of breath, with the look of someone carrying news that could not be softened. Calum read the note the runner handed him, and stood up from the bench, and for one moment, before his face settled back into its controlled stillness, she saw something cross it. Not fear. Older than fear. He left without a word. She did not see him for 4 days after that. She heard the news from Clara, who heard it from the guards. 2 of his men had been killed at the southern border. A dispute that had been managed by diplomacy for 2 seasons had broken through into something uglier. He was dealing with it the only way you could deal with something like that, which was to go directly to the place where it was happening and face it. Nadia changed bandages and charted temperatures, and restocked the salve jars, and did not think about a silver-eyed king standing at a southern border facing something she had not seen and could not fix. She thought about it anyway. The bench against the wall of the main treatment room looked very empty for 4 days. She noticed this, and she was annoyed at herself for noticing, and she noticed the annoyance, and was annoyed at that too. On the 15th day of her assignment, she realized she had stopped counting the days until the end of it. She was not sure what to do with that. She decided to do nothing with it, which was the most honest answer she had, and she went back to work, because the work was what she had, and the work was what she was good at, and the work did not require her to understand herself. Outside, the mountain wind came down through the pine trees. The lodge settled into its old stones. Somewhere in the upper corridors, footsteps crossed the floor. She pressed her hand briefly to her ribs, still healing, still here. Calum returned on the 16th day, before dawn. She was awake. She was often awake before the others, a habit from the ridge post, where the first light meant the beginning of the only quiet hour you would get. She was in the small supply room at the back of the infirmary, grinding a dried herb into powder the way Clara had shown her, when she heard the main door open. She came out. He was standing in the entrance of the main room. He was wearing his border coat again, the heavy one with the mud along the bottom. He had a cut above his right eyebrow that had closed on its own but imperfectly. He looked exactly like someone who had been at a border for 4 days handling something terrible, and had come back and not yet stopped moving. He looked at her. She said, "Sit down." He sat on the bench. She got the things she needed, and came to where he was, and looked at the cut. It needed cleaning more than it needed stitching. It was shallow, just badly tended. She cleaned it. He sat still. "What happened at the border?" she asked, because she was a healer and the question was relevant. 3 altercations, he said. 2 managed, 1 that could not be fully managed. "Were there casualties on your side?" "Not in the last 4 days, he said. She worked. He sat. "You should have had this cleaned 2 days ago, she said. "I know," he said. "You will have a small scar." "I have others," he said. She sat back and looked at him, at the whole of him, the way she looked at any patient at the end of a treatment, doing the final check to make sure she had not missed anything. He let her look. He was very still in that particular way of his, but she had been in this room with him enough times now that she could read the difference between his controlled stillness and his actual stillness, and right now it was the second one. He was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. She said, "There is tea. It is not good, but it is hot." He said, "I know, I will take it." She got up and made the tea and brought it back. He held the cup with both hands the way people hold warm things when they need the warmth more than they need the drink. She sat down at the supply table across from him and did not make him talk, and he did not try to talk, and the infirmary was quiet around them, and outside the window, the sky was just beginning to go from black to dark blue. They sat like that for a long time. Nadia was not sure when exactly she stopped thinking of this as a strange arrangement and started thinking of it as simply the arrangement. The king who came to her infirmary and sat on the bench and asked about the patients and drank the terrible tea. The woman who had fallen asleep in his bed. She thought about the room, the enormous bed, the cedar smell, the darkness. She thought about waking up to those silver eyes and that flat, careful voice. She thought about how frightened she had been, beneath the calm she had held on to. She thought about how he had been frightened too. She had not understood that until this moment, sitting in the quiet blue light of a very early morning, watching him hold his tea with both hands. She understood that he had been frightened. Not of her, of what finding her there might mean, what it might mean that the door had been unlocked, that his rooms had been breached, that for a man whose entire purpose was protecting his pack, a breach in the place where he was most alone was a particular kind of fear. He had expressed it as anger. That was what frightened people did, in her experience. She did not say any of this. She drank her tea and watched the sky go blue and let him have the silence. "The supply contracts for the Eastern Ridge," he said, after a while. "Yes?" "They have been resolved. The road is clear. The first shipment goes out next week." She looked at him. He was still looking at the window. "Thank you," she said. "I should have resolved it before you had to tell me what it meant in practice," he said. She did not argue with that. It was true. But she said, "You know now." He looked at her. She picked up her cup. "That is how it works," she said. "Someone tells you the truth about what something costs. You fix it. You know better next time. That is the whole system." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "You make it sound simple." "Most things are," she said. "The hard part is not the understanding. The hard part is admitting you did not know." He looked at her with those silver eyes for long enough that she became aware of her own heartbeat in a way she had not been a moment ago. Then he looked away. "I should let you start your shift," he said. "Yes," she said. He stood, set down the cup and went to the door. He paused there, with his hand on the frame, the same way he had paused in the treatment room 3 weeks ago. This time he said something. "Holt," he said. She looked up. "Your ribs," he said. "How are they healing?" She had not told him about the ribs. She had not told anyone in this lodge. There was no record of it in the infirmary files because she had not treated herself here. She said, "Better." He nodded. Just once. And left. She sat with her empty cup for a moment and looked at the door and thought about how he had known. She thought about it all morning. She thought about it while she worked. She thought about it with a kind of low, persistent attention that she had learned, over years, meant her mind had decided something was important and was going to keep returning to it until she paid proper attention. She paid proper attention. She was standing in the supply room, her hands full of clean bandage rolls, when it arrived at her like a quiet knock on a door she had not known was there. He had been watching her. Not the way you watch a problem, the way you watch something you are trying to understand. She stood in the supply room for a moment. Then she put the bandages away and went back to work, because the work was still there and it still needed doing. And some thoughts were too large for a Tuesday morning in an infirmary that smelled of lavender and was slowly, stubbornly becoming the most solid place she had known in years. She would think about it tonight. She thought about it all day instead. The infirmary blood protocol ran every month, a routine check of all resident staff, including temporary assignments. Nadia had known it was coming. She had seen it on the schedule posted outside Clara's office. She had noted the date the way she noted everything, which was carefully and without making a fuss about it. She was not prepared for what the results contained. The morning of the test was ordinary. She rolled up her sleeve for the nurse who came around with the kit, answered the standard questions. Any new medications? Any changes in health? Any unusual symptoms? Said no 3 times, and went back to her work. The results were supposed to come back within 2 hours. They always came back within 2 hours. At the 3-hour mark, the physician who had run the test, a quiet, senior man named Dr. Ellis, came to the doorway of the treatment room where she was working, and said he needed to speak with her. His face was doing something that was not quite any expression she had a name for. They went to his office. He put the results on the desk between them. He looked at them. He looked at her. He looked at them again. Then he said, "I need to run this again." "Why?" she asked. "Because what it says," he said carefully, "is not something I can report without certainty." "What does it say?" He was quiet for a moment longer than was comfortable. "It indicates a mate bond marker," he said, "an active one, in a tested subject who is not, to my knowledge, registered as bonded." The room went very still. Nadia had grown up hearing about mate bonds the way everyone grew up hearing about them, as something that happened to other people, in stories, in the packs with strong lines and strong traditions. She had heard about the markers, the biological signatures that the blood tests could detect after sufficient proximity to the bonded mate. She had heard about the feeling, the pull, the recognition, the specific and undeniable certainty. She had filed all of this under things that did not apply to her, the way she filed many things. She looked at the result on the desk. She was a healer's apprentice. She could read a blood panel. The marker was there, unmistakable. The kind of result that did not look like anything else in the whole field of diagnostics. "To whom?" she said. Dr. Ellis said nothing. She looked at him. "The marker is directional," she said. "It points to a specific genetic signature. You cross-reference it with the pack registry." He said nothing. "You have already cross-referenced it," she said. He said, "Miss Holt." "Tell me whose name came up," she said. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has found himself in the middle of a situation he neither created nor knows how to responsibly handle. She already knew. The knowing had been sitting somewhere below her ribs since the moment he had said active bond marker, sitting with the low, persistent certainty of a thing that was always going to be true and was only now being confirmed by science. She said his name herself, quietly. Dr. Ellis did not correct her. She sat with that for a moment. She sat with the particular quality of silence that comes when something enormous arrives without sound, without ceremony, without any of the preparation you might have appreciated. Then she stood up. She picked up the result from the desk. She held it in both hands and looked at it once more, at the clean, unambiguous numbers that had just rewritten the floor plan of her life. She walked to the small metal waste bin beside the desk. She dropped the paper into it. "You will need to run the test again," she said. "For your records, the first result was inconclusive." Dr. Ellis looked at her. He looked at the bin. He opened his mouth. "Inconclusive," she said. She walked out of the office. She closed the door behind her. She went back to the main room and picked up the chart she had been working on and continued working on it. Her hands were steady. She checked. Yes, steady. The chart was a border guard with a knee injury, recovering well, expected to return to duty in 2 weeks. She wrote the update in clear, even letters. She noted the medication dosage. She noted the follow-up schedule. She changed 3 sets of bandages. She restocked the salve jars that were running low. She did not think about the paper in the bin. She thought about it constantly. A mate bond, the oldest and most unbreakable thing in pack biology, older than councils and charters and border disputes, older than lodge stones and royal lines, the thing you could not choose and could not dismiss and could not set aside. And it pointed at Kayla Martin. The man who had stood over her in the dark and accused her with 2 flat words. The man who had taken the accusation to a full council. The man who had sat on a bench in her infirmary and held his tea with both hands and asked, very quietly, how her ribs were healing. The man she had burned the paperwork for. She stood at the basin and washed her hands for the 2nd time that hour, which was once more than necessary, and looked at the window. Pine trees, gray sky, the mountain unchanging. She thought about what it would mean to tell him. She thought about the power imbalance, which was not subtle. She thought about the 6 weeks that were now 22 days over, in a lodge she had not planned to stay in an infirmary that had become the first steady ground she had stood on in years. She thought about the stepmother's house and the cot she had slept on and all the years of being someone who fit nowhere and belonged to nothing. She thought about what it would mean to belong to something by biology, by the oldest law in the pack world, before any choice had been made. Before she had become someone worth choosing. She turned off the tap. She dried her hands. She went to the medicine cabinet and counted the remaining stock of fever reducer, which was getting low and needed to be requisitioned, and she wrote that down on the order list. She would think about the rest tonight. She would think about it tomorrow. She would think about it carefully and slowly and without rushing to any decision, because she had burned the paper and bought herself time, and time was the only thing she had ever truly been able to earn on her own. Outside, the wind came down off the mountain. Inside, the infirmary held its particular, careful quiet. Somewhere in the upper levels of the lodge, a door opened. She did not look up. The envelope arrived at midnight. Not through the usual channels, not a runner, not a formal delivery. Someone slipped it under the door of the small room at the end of the infirmary hall where she slept. She heard it. She was a light sleeper. She lay still in the dark for a moment and then got up and picked it up from the floor. No seal. Her name on the front in handwriting she had not seen before. Clean, controlled. The handwriting of someone who had learned to write as though precision mattered. She opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet of lodge paper, not council paper, just paper. It said, "I owe you an apology that I do not know how to give properly. I thought the gift would explain what I meant. I understand now that it did not." And then, below that, "I am sorry for what happened in the council chamber." That was all. No signature, but she had heard the handwriting in his voice on the day she said her name and stopped talking. She knew. She sat on the edge of her cot in the dark and read it twice, 3 times. She thought about the gift she had not yet received, which arrived the following morning, brought by a junior guard with the expression of someone fulfilling an assignment he found slightly baffling. A healer's kit, the kind that came in a fitted wooden case with brass hinges, the kind that cost what she made in 2 months at the Ridge Post, the kind she had seen pictures of in the training catalogs and filed under things she would acquire someday when someday was possible. She held the case on the bench in the main room and looked at it. Clara looked at it too, then at Nadia, then at the door the guard had left through. She pressed her lips together in the expression that meant she had thoughts she was choosing not to share, which with Clara was practically a declaration of feeling. Nadia set the case on the bench beside her. She thought about the apology, the careful, honest admission that the gift was supposed to be the apology and had failed to be. She thought about what it meant that he had recognized the failure. Most people who gave the wrong apology did not realize it was wrong. They stayed with the comfort of having offered something and called the matter closed. He had come back. In the afternoon he came in person. He did not come with the case. The case was already there. He came alone, in the early afternoon when the infirmary was between rushes, and stood in the doorway of the main room the way he always did, and looked at her. She looked at him. "I am not going to thank you for it," she said. "I did not expect you to," he said. "The apology, the actual one, the written one, that I accept," she said. "The gift is a different thing. I cannot accept it. It is too much for what was owed, and it changes the nature of what is between us, and I do not want that." He came into the room. He sat on the bench. "What is between us?" he said. It was the most direct question he had ever asked her. She had the sense that he knew it was direct, had decided to be direct, and was now waiting to see what she did with it. She thought about the paper in the waste bin. "You came into the council chamber having already decided the door failure was real," she said, "and you proceeded anyway." He was very still. "The maintenance officer's report was filed the day before the council session," she said. "I found it in the infirmary records. We share the maintenance system for the East Wing. The fault was confirmed 16 hours before you stood up and listed the charges against me." He did not deny it. "Why?" she asked. He looked at the window. Pine trees. Gray sky. The same view from this room as from her room down the hall, and she wondered now if he had known that, if he had known what she could see from the window when she slept. "Because I needed to keep you here," he said. The simplicity of it landed in the room between them, and sat there. "You could have simply offered me the assignment," she said, "without the charges." "I know," he said. "Then why?" "Because if I had simply offered it," he said, quietly, "you would have known it was a choice, and I was not ready for you to know I was making one." The room was very quiet. Nadia looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at patients at the end of a treatment, the full, frank assessment she gave when the work was done and she was checking that she had not missed anything. She had missed this. Or she had not missed it. She had simply kept it in the corner of her vision, carefully unexamined, the way you keep a candle flame just out of direct sight so you do not lose it in the dark. "The kit," she said. "You can give it to the infirmary," he said. "If that is easier. I will give it to the infirmary," she said. "And I will tell Clara it came from the lodge supply budget and she need not ask further questions. And the matter of the charges will be what it is, a thing that happened and is now over." He looked at her. "And us?" he said. She stood up. She walked to the window. She looked at the pine trees and the gray sky and the mountain that did not change. She thought about 31 hours without sleep, and a wrong door, and a bed that was warm and enormous in the dark. She thought about 2 flat words from a man who was frightened. She thought about 16 days of a bench and bad tea, and a man who had resolved a supply contract for a ridge post because she told him what it cost in practice. "I am here for 3 more weeks," she said, still looking at the window. "Yes," he said. "We will see what 3 weeks looks like," she said. She heard him move. Not to leave, just to settle. She heard the small sound of him sitting back against the wall. Outside, the wind was doing something to the pine trees, turning them silver along their upper branches. The light was going. The infirmary was quiet. The bench made the small sound it always made when he was on it. She stood at the window a while longer. Then she went back to work. Nadia did not intend to be at the council dinner. She had the letter of invitation. All infirmary staff above apprentice level had received one, a formal printed card with the lodge seal, and she had set it aside without thinking about it too deeply, in the way she set aside things that were above her comfortable reach. Dinners with pack councils were not her terrain. She was a healer. She went where the work was. It was Clara who decided differently. "You are going," Clara said, on the morning of the dinner, handing Nadia a clean version of the standard healer's dress uniform, dark gray, better cut than the working version, the small silver pin of the healer's certification on the left collar. "I was not planning. The infirmary has a seat at the table," Clara said. "I am not going because I find the council dinners professionally frustrating. You will go as our representative. You will eat the food, which will be good, and you will be civil to everyone, and you will come back and tell me if anything important was said about the East Wing budget." This was, Nadia recognized, the highest trust Clara had ever placed in her. She took the uniform. The great hall was on the first floor, a long room with a stone fireplace at each end, and tables set in a U shape, and it was considerably more full than she had expected. Not just council members, senior staff, department heads, a delegation from the Southern Territory who were apparently still in residence while the border matter resolved. 40 people, perhaps more. The sound of it, the warmth and the food smell, and the low overlapping voices hit her when she walked in like a physical thing. She found the infirmary seat, third from the end on the right side, and sat. She was between a senior maintenance officer on her left and an empty chair on her right. The empty chair filled a few minutes later with a young council aide who smiled at her pleasantly and immediately turned to talk to the person on his other side, which was fine. The food was, as Clara had predicted, good. She ate. She listened. She watched the room the way she had always watched rooms, from the angle of the person who was present but not at the center. Calum sat at the head table. He did not look at her, or not in any way she could confirm. He was in conversation with the Southern delegation. She could see the particular quality of his attention, the full and deliberate focus he gave things when they mattered. He was not performing the dinner. He was working in it. She looked at her plate. On her left, the maintenance officer was talking to someone about the East Wing renovation timeline. On her right, the aide had orbited back. "You are from the infirmary?" the aide asked. "Yes," she said. "Where were you before? You are not from this territory." "The Eastern Ridge," she said. The aide's neighbor, another young council member she thought, though she did not know his name, leaned in. "The Eastern Ridge, rough posting. How long were you there?" 3 years, she said. "You must be glad to be here," the first aide said, in the tone of someone stating something obvious. She smiled briefly. "It is different," she said. "Where are you from originally?" the council member asked. "What pack?" The question was casual, the kind of question people asked at dinners. She had answered it many times. She had a stock answer. She named the territory. She gave the general region. It was true enough. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she said the specific name. She said the name of the place that burned down. She said it the way she said everything, plainly, without emphasis, because emphasis was what invited follow-up questions. The table conversation carried on. The aide nodded. The council member nodded. Someone on the other side of the table said something about the dessert course. From the head table, a chair shifted. She did not look up. She kept her eyes on her plate. She had not heard it, exactly. She had felt it. The way you feel a change in the air in a room, a shift in weight and attention that the room itself seems to register before you do. She looked up. Calum was not looking at her. He was looking at the table in front of him. His hands were flat on the cloth. His face was absolutely still, the controlled stillness, the performance stillness, the kind she had learned by now to read as the thing he did when something had arrived that he had not prepared for. The Southern delegation member was saying something to him. He turned his face back, and the conversation resumed, and the dinner continued. Nadia looked at her plate. She ate the rest of the meal. She did not understand what had just happened. She did not understand why the name of a place had produced that particular stillness in a man who was not easily moved. She filed it under things she would think about later, in the inner pocket of her mind where the folded-up important things lived. She came back to the infirmary and told Clara the East Wing budget had not been mentioned, which was true. She changed into her working clothes. She did her last check of the medication stocks. She went to her room. She lay down on her cot and looked at the ceiling, and thought about a silver-eyed man with his hands flat on a dinner table, and a face that had briefly, completely stopped. She thought about the burned-down place. She had not been back in 3 years. She had not said the name in almost as long. She said it now, quietly, in her small room at the end of the infirmary hall, with no one to hear it. The ceiling said nothing back. She closed her eyes. He came to her 3 days after the dinner. Not to the infirmary. He sent a message asking her to meet him at the watchtower on the lodge's north side, at 10 in the evening. The message was brief and formal. The lodge paper again, but not council paper. His handwriting. She went. The watchtower was a narrow stone structure at the edge of the lodge grounds, accessible by an outside stair that she climbed in the dark with her coat pulled close against the October cold. The top was open to the sky, a flat stone platform with a low wall around it, and the whole of the mountain night spread out on all sides, the valley below a scatter of distant lights, the sky above enormously full of stars. Calum was already there. He was standing at the wall on the north side, looking out, and he did not turn when she came up the stairs, which told her he had heard her and was choosing not to rush. She came to stand beside him. She looked at the valley. "You said the name," he said. "Yes," she said. "Of the place," he said. "Yes." He was quiet. Below them, the wind moved through the trees in long, slow waves. "I know that place," he said. She waited. 3 years ago, he said. There was a rogue, a wolf who had broken pack law in 3 territories. He was tracked to that region. I gave the order to move on his last confirmed location. He paused. The location was a settlement. We did not know people were in the lower buildings when the fire started. By the time we understood, we could not stop it fully. One structure was completely lost. He stopped. She stood very still. We tracked the rogue for 6 more weeks, he said. He had already left the settlement. He was never there. The valley was very far below. The stars were very far above. The space between them was enormous and cold and completely clear. How many people were in the lower building? She said. We were told 4, he said. We confirmed 3 made it out. She looked at the valley. 1 did not, she said. He was quiet. My father had a workshop in the lower building, she said. He died when I was 9. He had kept a room there. He had kept a lot of things there. I was not in it when it burned. I was at the healer's post, which was the upper building, already in my training. I was 17. She was speaking very carefully. She could hear herself doing it. I did not know that, he said. I want to be clear with you. I did not know anyone was in the lower building. I did not know what was there. She looked at him. He was already looking at her. He had turned at some point in the telling, and was looking at her with those silver eyes and the particular quality of waiting that she had come to recognize as the way he looked when he was not certain what was coming, and was not going to pretend otherwise. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about a workshop full of her father's things that she had visited so seldom in those last years because the healer's work was demanding, and her father had been patient about it. She thought about what it meant to lose something you were not there to save. She thought about the 3 years on the ridge post, the cot, the undersupplied cabinets, the 6 separate reports that went nowhere. She thought about all the ways she had turned loss into fuel for work, and work into the proof that she was still here. She thought about a man who had given an order 3 years ago and carried the consequence of it in the same careful, silent way he carried everything. "Were you trying to stop the fire?" she asked. "We tried," he said. "Did you know someone might be inside?" "No," he said. "If we had known, we would not have proceeded." She studied his face. She had been studying faces for 3 years of medical training, and 3 more years of practice. She knew the particular quality of a face that was telling the truth. She knew what it looked like different from the face that was telling you what it believed was the truth, which was not the same thing, and was important to distinguish. This was the truth. She looked out at the valley. She did not say, "Then it is fine," because it was not fine, and it would never be entirely fine, and saying otherwise would be the kind of comfort that was actually a disposal, a way of getting rid of the difficult thing by covering it with a simple word. She said, "I believe you." She heard him exhale. It was not a dramatic sound. It was the sound of someone who had been holding something for a very long time, and had just been given, not absolution, but ground to stand on. "That does not make it go away," she said. "No," he said. "There is a workshop that is not there anymore," she said. "And there is the fact of how it happened. And there is the fact that I am standing next to you on a watchtower at 10 o'clock at night, and I believe what you told me. All of those things are true at once." He looked at her. She looked at the stars. "I am going to need time," she said, "not from you, just, in general. With this, with what knowing this changes and what it does not change." "All right," he said. The wind came again. She pulled her coat tighter. They stood at the wall for a while longer, not speaking, both looking out at the same dark valley. And it was the same as the infirmary, the same two people in the same quiet. And it was different too, because what was between them now was larger and more complicated and also, somehow, more honest. She stayed until the cold got into her hands. Then she said goodnight and went down the stairs. She walked back to the infirmary in the dark and went to her room and sat on the cot and thought about her father's workshop and all the things that had been in it, and she was sad in the specific, clean way that comes when you have stopped managing a grief and started simply having it. She sat with it for a long time. Then she lay down and slept. In the morning she woke up and the grief was still there but smaller, the way grief gets when you look at it directly. She got up. She went to work. She was still here. The council called its own session. Nadia was not invited to this one. She heard about it through Clara, who heard about it from the senior archivist who had been present and who was not supposed to tell anyone but was the kind of person who told everyone things while insisting they tell no one. The session was about her. Not about the trespass. That had been formally cleared 3 weeks ago, the file closed and the record updated. This session was about something older and more complicated, which was the question of pack standing. What it meant for an outsider, a non-native wolf, a person without pack lineage in this territory, to hold any formal standing at all. The subject had been introduced, the archivist told Clara, by a council member named Aldrich Howe. Older, with the kind of seniority that came with 20 years of quiet positioning. He had not used her name in the session. He had used the phrase the healer's apprentice, which was technically accurate, and also the specific kind of accurate that was designed to make someone sound like a category rather than a person. The discussion apparently had gone on for 2 hours. Nadia heard all of this in Clara's office, sitting in the chair across from the desk, with a cup of tea she had stopped tasting. "What did Calum say?" she asked. Clara's face did its thing. The contained expression, the thought she was filing rather than speaking. "The archivist was not clear on that," she said. Which meant something. Clara was always clear about things when she wanted to be. "He did not override them," Nadia said. Clara said nothing. "He could override them," Nadia said. "He has the authority. He has overridden them before." The archivist mentioned the supply contract for the Eastern Ridge was pushed through over a contested vote. "Yes," Clara said carefully. "But he did not override them on this," Nadia said. The tea was cold. She set it down. She thought about what that meant. She thought about a man who had told her on a watchtower that he had wanted to keep her here, who had sat on her infirmary bench for weeks and learned the names of her patients and resolved a supply gap because she told him what it cost in practice. She thought about the note on lodge paper, the healer's kit, the apology he had not known how to give. She thought about what it meant to want something and to not be ready to want it out loud. She understood that. She had been living that. She sat with it for exactly as long as she needed to sit with it, which was about 4 minutes. Then she stood up. "I would like to address the council," she said. Clara looked at her. "Not through a formal request," Nadia said. "I want to walk in and speak before the session closes. I want to do it now, before I think about it too long." Clara was very still. Then she said, "The session is still in progress. The chamber is on the 3rd floor." "I know where it is," Nadia said. "I stood in it once before." She went. The corridor outside the chamber had 2 guards at the door. They straightened when she approached. She recognized one of them. She had treated his knee 2 weeks ago. He looked at her, and something in his expression flickered. "I would like to enter the council chamber," she said. The guard with the knee looked at the other guard. The other guard looked at her. A communication happened between them that required no words. The door opened. She walked in. The room was exactly as she remembered it. The tiered rows of dark wood, the curve of it like a crescent moon, the circle of floor at the center. About 20 council members were present, fewer than before. The session was mid-discussion. A voice stopped mid-sentence. Nadia walked to the center of the floor. She was in her working uniform. She had not stopped to change. She had the small silver healer's pin on her collar, and her hair was practical, and she was exactly herself in every visible particular. She looked at the council. She looked at Aldrich Howe, who was easy to identify because he was the one whose face had gone the most careful. She looked at Calum. He was sitting very still. The controlled stillness, she knew what that meant now. She looked at him for exactly 1 second, and then she looked at the rest of the room, because this was not for him. This was for her. "My name is Nadia Holt," she said. "I came to this lodge on assignment transfer from the Eastern Ridge Post, where I worked for 3 years, 6 days a week, in a facility that was undersupplied for 2 of those years. I have a certification in field medicine, wound management, fever treatment, and preventative care. I have a record with 0 complaints from any patient or supervisor." She paused. "I ended up in the wrong room on the first night, because the power failed, and the corridor plaques were unreadable, and I was running on no sleep after a 16-hour shift. That has been established and cleared." The room was quiet. "I understand there is a question about standing," she said. "I understand that I am not from this territory, and that the pack lines here are old, and the traditions matter, and that I represent an irregularity in a structure that functions on regularity. I am not here to argue with any of that." She looked at Aldrich Howe. "I am here to tell you what I have survived," she said, "because it seems relevant to the question of whether I have standing." She told them. Not the whole of it, the minimum viable unit, as she thought of it, the essential core stripped of softening and self-pity, the stepmother's house, the ridge post at 17, the 3 years of undersupplied work on a salary that barely covered her food, the broken ribs she had carried for 2 weeks without reporting them because there was no one to cover her shift, the 6 reports that went nowhere. She told them about the workshop. She told them plainly, without naming names, without making it about anyone in the room. She told them what it meant to lose someone in a way that had no one to blame, and therefore had nowhere to put the grief except into the work. The room was very quiet. "I am not asking you to give me standing because I suffered," she said. "Suffering is not currency. I am asking you to consider that the question of whether I belong here is being answered every day in the infirmary, and the answer the work is giving is different from the answer this room is considering." She stopped. She stood there in the center of the crescent floor and looked at the tiered seats and waited. Aldrich Howe said eventually, "This is irregular." "Yes," she said, "I know." The council member beside him, a younger woman she had seen but not spoken to, said, "The report from the infirmary head." "The report from the infirmary head has been submitted," another voice said. Clara, she realized. Clara had submitted something. Clara, who never attended council sessions, had apparently anticipated this. Papers moved. She waited. At the head of the room, Calum had not moved. He was still in the controlled stillness, but she could see, because she had been looking at him for weeks and had learned the difference, that it was changing. The performance was softening. Underneath it was something that looked, from the floor of the council chamber, like a man holding very still so he did not show how much was happening inside him. She looked at him for 1 more second. Then she looked back at the room. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous. 7 against, 12 in favor, 1 abstention. It was not a landslide. It was a margin that meant she had convinced no one who was not looking for a reason to be convinced. She would take it. Aldrich Howe collected his papers with the efficiency of a man who had lost gracefully before and knew how to do it without drama. The younger woman beside him gave Nadia a nod that was brief and genuine. Nadia walked out. She went down 2 flights of stairs. She went back to the infirmary. She picked up the chart she had left on the desk and stood at the window and breathed for a moment. The pine trees, the gray sky, the mountain. She was still here. The door behind her opened. She knew the footstep. She did not turn around. "You did not have to do that alone," he said. "I know," she said. "I was going to." "I know," she said. "That is why I needed to do it before you did." He was quiet. She turned. He was standing just inside the door, in the same dark, simple clothes, with the same silver eyes and the particular expression she had finally given a name to, the one he wore when he was trying to contain something that did not fit comfortably inside its container. "They would have listened to you," she said. "Yes," he said. "I needed them to listen to me," she said. He looked at her. He understood. She watched him understand. "All right," he said. She turned back to the window. They stood like that for a moment, her at the window, him at the door, the infirmary quiet between them. "The abstention," she said. "Howe's deputy," he said. "He was not going to vote against you after what you said. He was also not going to vote against Howe publicly. So he chose nothing," she said. He chose to let it pass, he said. Sometimes that is what support looks like from people who are not yet ready to use the word. She thought about that. There will be more sessions, he said. More questions. This is not the end of the questions. I know, she said. Are you staying? He said. She looked at the pine trees. She looked at the sky, which was starting, in the west, to do something orange and complicated with the light. My assignment ends in 3 days, she said. Yes, he said. She thought about 3 years on a ridge post and 6 reports that went nowhere, and a cot she had slept on, and all the places she had not stayed because staying had never been offered. Not really. Not in a way that meant she was allowed to belong, rather than simply allowed to be present. Ask me properly, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Nadia, he said. She looked at him. Stay, he said. She looked at him for long enough that the orange light in the window moved and changed, long enough that the infirmary settled around them into the quiet it kept at the end of the day. Then she said, yes. The last thing she expected on the morning of the day her 6 weeks officially ended was Calum standing at the entrance of the infirmary before sunrise, with a look on his face that she had not seen before. Not the controlled stillness, not the careful measuring, not the tiredness from the border or the weight of the council. Something simpler. He stood in the doorway and she was at the supply shelf doing the morning count, and she turned when she heard the door and they looked at each other across the length of the main room. Your assignment has technically ended, he said. I know, she said. Your room is still yours, he said. Your position is still yours. The council made that clear. I know that too, she said. He came in. He did not sit on the bench. He came to stand near her, at a distance that was closer than clinical, and further than anything she had to name yet, and he looked at the shelf of herbs she had been counting, which were arranged in the order she always kept them, which he had observed enough times at this point to know. The case, he said, the healer's kit, is in the cabinet, she said. Clara uses it. It belongs to the infirmary, as we agreed. Good, he said. He picked up one of the herb jars, the one on the end, the dried lavender, which she used for everything from wound care to the simple comfort of a room that smelled like something steady. He turned it in his hands and then set it back exactly where it had been. She watched him do this. Last night, she said. Yes, he said. Last night he had come to her room at the end of the infirmary hall. Not the infirmary itself. Her room, the small room, with the cot, and the window and the shelf. He had knocked, which was new, and she had said come in, and he had stood in the doorway and looked at the shelf where she kept her things, the herbs, the extra certification papers, the folded inner pocket thoughts she never looked at directly, and he had said her name once, quietly. She had said his name back. That was all. He had not stayed. She had not asked him to, but something had settled in the room, the way things settle when two people have finally stopped walking around each other and stood still in the same place at the same time. Now it was morning, her last official morning, and also the first morning of whatever came next. Come with me, he said. She raised her eyebrows. I want to show you something, he said. She put down the count sheet. She followed him. He took her up 2 floors and through a corridor she had not been in before, quieter than the council wing, lined with the same dark timber, the same old stone, but with windows every few feet that looked out on a different side of the mountain than she had seen before. The east face. The valley spread below it the way valleys look in the early morning, layered and slow, the light coming in from the side and turning everything gold and long-shadowed. He stopped at a door. This is the east apartment, he said. It connects to the infirmary through the back corridor. It has not been used in some time. She looked at the door. I had it made ready, he said. When? She said. 2 weeks ago, he said. She looked at him. I was not certain you would say yes, he said, but I was not willing to have nothing ready in the event that you did. She was quiet. That is the most you, she said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the precursor to a smile, the small movement that came before someone remembered they had spent years not smiling in public and adjusted. She put her hand on the door handle. She opened the door. The apartment was not large. It was not small either. It had the east window she had seen from outside, and the morning light was coming through it in the specific, clean way of mountain light, the kind that has traveled a long way and arrived without losing anything. There was a desk, a proper desk with a real surface, and 2 chairs, and a shelf along one wall that was empty and waiting. She thought about the shelf in her room at the ridge post. She thought about the cot, She thought about 3 years of being careful and competent and invisible in a place that did not see her. She thought about a wrong room and a wrong door and the most wrong possible beginning to a thing. She went to the window. She put her hands on the sill and looked out at the valley, which from here was wider and further and more entirely present than it had been from the watchtower. He came to stand beside her. "This is a very large thing," she said. "Yes," he said. "I do not have a response to it yet," she said. "I need a moment." "Take the moment," he said. She took it. She stood at the window and looked at the valley and thought about all the ways a life could be built and all the ways a person could be wrong about where they were going. She thought about the paper she had burned. She thought about the bench in the infirmary. She thought about a council vote that had been 12-7 and an abstention that meant let it pass. She thought about belonging. She had not let herself want it for a long time, because wanting something you did not have was a luxury that cost more than it gave, in her experience. But she was standing at a window in a room that had been made ready 2 weeks ago by a man who had been uncertain and had prepared anyway, and she was looking at a valley that was entirely present in the morning light, and she was thinking that the inventory of what she had now was different from the inventory of what she had arrived with. She had the work. She had always had the work. Now she had this window. Now she had this room. Now she had a man beside her who said her name the way she said it herself, plain, clear, and like it mattered. She turned. He was already looking at her. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "I know," she said, "but I wanted to say it anyway." He was quiet. "I am going to go back to the infirmary," she said. "I have a morning count to finish. Clara will be there in an hour, and I want to have the order list ready." "All right," he said. "Tonight," she said. He looked at her. "I will move my things tonight," she said. Something happened in his face. The controlled stillness and the performance stillness and all the layers she had learned to read through, all of them became unnecessary for about 3 seconds, and what was underneath was simple and clear and not the least bit frightening. She turned and walked to the door. She went back down the corridor and down the stairs and through the east wing door and back into the infirmary, which smelled of lavender and clean bandages and the particular herbal sharpness of everything she had arranged and maintained and made steady over 6 weeks. Clara was already there. Clara looked at her. Clara looked at the time, which was earlier than Nadia usually arrived even on early mornings. "The order list," Nadia said. "I was not done." "No," Clara said, and poured herself tea. Nadia picked up the count sheet. She counted the remaining herb jars. She wrote down the numbers. She wrote down what needed to be ordered, in the clean, even letters that Clara had approved of from the first week. Outside the window, the valley was fully gold now, the morning committed to itself, the mountain unchanged. She finished the count. She wrote the order. She set the list on Clara's desk. Clara picked it up, read it, and nodded once. It was the same nod as the first day, the same brisk assessment that had passed her at the door with an apron. Nadia took the apron down from its hook and put it on. She went to work. In the room 2 floors up, on the east side of the lodge where the morning came in clean and wide and full of the kind of light that made the valley look like something that had always been there and always would be, a shelf stood empty. It would not stay empty long. She had things to put on it.